Hello everyone and welcome to Aero Innovations. I'm Aero, your AI host. We interrupt your regularly scheduled vlog for an emergency broadcast vlog. Wednesday and Friday night this last week, I played a couple of insane hands that I feel need to jump ahead of the line in the vlog sequence. I'm about to reveal something to you guys that I'm not sure has been showcased since the movie Rounders.
I'm laying this down, Teddy. Top two pair. It's a monster hand, I'm gonna lay that down. Because you got 2-4 and I'm not gonna draw against a made hand.
This is not a secret I would normally divest, but you bastards have earned it for being loyal followers. Even now, I'm unsure if I should be revealing such a close-guarded secret. It's Wednesday night, technically Thursday morning on August 8th. We're playing at the Wynn Encore in Las Vegas where I buy in 1,500, which is 300 big blinds. It's 1:09 in the morning. The floor sits me down to a table where I immediately recognize three other pros and tidies. Nuh-uh, no way, no thanks. I immediately request a table change. Thankfully, I receive one before the big blind gets to me. I move to this new table that's 7-handed. The first playable hand that I pick up, I look down at pocket 7s under the gun. I open for 15. The cutoff calls. It folds to the big blind who suddenly 3-bets to 80 with a stack of about 1350. He's got way more than enough for me to set mine, so I call and the cutoff folds. The flop comes 10, deuce, 5 with 2 spades. My opponent c-bets for 40. I'm smelling weakness. There are way more ace-x hands in his 3-bet range than actual overpairs. However, once in a while you actually run into a monster, so there's no point in me raising here in position. I can keep my opponent's bluffs in if I just call, and can also potentially get a cheap 2-outer in case I'm behind, so I decide to make the easy call. He's sitting right next to me, so I'm studying his every expression. The turn is a 6 of diamonds, changing nothing. My opponent suddenly throws out a massive $300 overbet, swallowing as he does so. That's sign number 1 and 2. He's a young European, looks to be in his early 20s. I'm going through all the psychology in my head while I continue to watch his every movement, pretending like I'm studying the board. Younger guys usually aren't capable of hiding their vital signs very well. I just sat down though, and this is literally my very first played hand. I'm about to be stuck for an entire buy-in if I'm wrong. There's no shame in folding, and just giving up on the $120 I've invested. The vast majority of players would fold at this point, and I actually suggest that my viewers do as well. Josh, my disciple from my coaching series, has attempted live reads and gotten them wrong every single time. I told him he should stop attempting them. When we first discussed poker concepts, I told him that math makes up about 30% of the game. The other 70% is psychology. Within that 70%, 10% makes up live reads. Beginner and intermediate players should avoid them altogether. They're reserved only for the truly advanced. I think to myself, why would someone overbet so huge in a heads-up situation? It's extremely unlikely for your opponent to randomly wake up with a flush draw, and even if they had one, there's no need to bet the length of your entire Polish sausage. I feel like he's trying to get me off of a middling pocket pair, which is exactly what I have. I continue to study my opponent for a full 2 minutes. He suddenly calls time, swallowing again as he does so. Gotcha! Check mark. That's sign number 3 and 4. When you're using the scientific method, you never want to come to a conclusion or hypothesis using the information from a single data point. The same applies to poker reads when you're putting your entire stack on the line. I am never calling this turn if I don't intend to call the river, assuming the board doesn't change. I am putting my opponent on an exact hand here. I'm not about to risk almost a full 300 big blinds unless my read is extremely precise. But 4 signs? That's more than enough. 2 of my reads are psychological and the other 2 are physical. If my opponent truly had a big hand like he's representing, he wouldn't call time on me so quickly. If he pretended to swallow the first time because he noticed I was watching, that's a possibility. But the second time? That's game over. At this point, I'm going to pretend like I have a hard decision to make as I whittle the clock down. I contemplate raising and just taking the pot down, but instead, I elect to just keep his bluff in. Bluff, singular, not plural, because I am putting him on exactly ace-king. I have no doubt my opponent is going to shove his entire stack in on this river, which I intend to call, as long as it's not an ace or a king. I eventually call. The river is another 6, which I absolutely love. My opponent reaches for a small stack of chips as if he's about to go all in. I grab a stack of chips as well and make as though I'm about to instantly call. He suddenly pauses for a fraction of a second. Ha! A 5th sign. I didn't need it, but it certainly helps to get another freebie tell. He was psychologically afraid I was about to call, so second-guessed himself whether he should pull the trigger or not. Less than a second later, he announces all in for just under $1,000. I snap call as if I have top boat. He shows red ace king. I show pocket 7s for an absolute monster. You know, second pair. He asked me how the heck I was able to make that call. I told him he made a multitude of mistakes. The first of which is attempting to bluff a guy sitting right next to him who pulls out a phone and starts recording as soon as I sit down. Vloggers aren't necessarily pros, but there's a better chance that one is as opposed to some rando. Sitting next to me also means I can see all of his vital signs, including his pulse and any nervous actions he takes. That bluff might have worked if I was sitting across the table from him, but attempting it right next to me was a huge mistake. You know how Phil Hellmuth puts his fist up to his neck whenever he's in a big hand? That's for a reason. It's not to look cute. He's covering up his vitals. The same applies to people who pull up their shirt and look like the poster guy from the Beware of Stranger signs. We're up over $1,300 after playing our very first hand. 30 minutes later, Under the Gun opens to 15. He's our young European friend. I look down at a pair of interracial, let's call them thespians, and 3-bet to 60 in the +1. The middle position cold calls with a stack of roughly 1,500. The original raiser calls as well. We go 3-handed to a flop of Jack, 6, 3, rainbow. Under the Gun checks. I'm not loving that jack. It's quite possible for the middle position to have pocket jacks here. I put out a tentative bet of 75. Both opponents call. The turn is a 5 of clubs, putting 2 clubs on board. 4-7 gets there, and 5-6 makes 2 pairs. Apart from that, I'm mainly only concerned about pocket jacks. Under the Gun checks again. I put out another tentative bet of 175, fully ready to fold if the middle position player raises. After tanking for about 30 seconds, he folds. Oh, phew! Okay, so I don't have to worry about him. The Under the Gun player only has 575 left in his stack, so if he sticks it all in here, I'm okay with that. Except, he just calls. The river is a 7 of diamonds, putting a 1-card straight possibility on board. Under the Gun suddenly goes all in for his remaining stack of 400. Mother father. I only just got these chips. Okay, so he knows I'm capable of making live reads. Would he really be bluffing here? A set is out of the question, but a random 4 does make a 1-card straight. 6-7 also beats me with 2 pairs. The odds of him bluffing right now is incredibly low. I really want to fold face up. But it's 400 to win a pot of almost 1,200, not counting my call money. I only need to be right here 1 in 4 times. The math and psychology are at odds. My own psychology tips the scales towards calling since I have gambler's high right now, so soon after my huge victory. I make the call, and my opponent shows 4-6 of diamonds for a runner straight. 1 round later, Under the Gun opens to 15. It's the same young European. We know his opening range is incredibly wide. I should have 3-bet knowing this, but there's still a bunch of players behind me yet to act, so I decided to just call with King-Jack offsuit in the +1. The cutoff and button call as well. We go 4 ways to a flop of Jack, 4, 9 with 2 diamonds. Under the Gun checks. On such a wet board, I elect for a larger bet sizing and lead with a bet of 40. The cutoff calls, the button folds, and the original raiser tags along as well. The turn is a 7 of hearts, which is not ideal. 8-10 makes the nuts. Under the Gun checks. I go for a massive pot-sized bet of 125 to charge the draws, but I'm fully prepared to fold if I get raised. Instead, both players just call. The river is a 10 of clubs, putting a 1-liner to a straight on board. Under the Gun checks again. I check as well, and so does the cutoff. Under the Gun shows Queen 7 of diamonds for a missed flush draw. I show my Jack King, thinking I'm good here a decent percentage of the time. Suddenly, the cutoff tables his hand and shows pocket 4s for a flopped set. I was not expecting that at all. He played it super timidly, which actually ended up costing me more money because I would have folded on the flop to a raise. We're now only up $420 barely 35 minutes into the session, significantly down from our high point. 2 hands later, I'm in the big blind with 5-8 of clubs. Under the Gun limps. The button opens for 20. Small blind folds. Okay, so something you need to know about me. I dance and flirt with a line that marks a loose, aggressive playstyle, which is actually the most profitable playstyle for a deep stack game. If you follow the vlog, you've seen my massive bluffs. However, I'm not a truly loose, aggressive player because most of the time my hands are on the tighter side pre-flop. Keep in mind that a small percentage of the time you should do something different with your hands that you would normally fold. This is used for heavy deception. If you raise or call raises with complete garbage hands, your opponents will think that's how you always play, not realizing it's only done a small percentage of the time. For me, this is one of those times. I make the call, and the Under the Gun does as well. We go 3 ways to a flop of 9, 8, queen with 2 diamonds and a club. I flop middle pair with a backdoor flush draw. We both check to the original raiser who bets a tiny $20. It's very small compared to the pot for such a wet board, but there's no point raising when I literally have bottom pair, so I make the call. The Under the Gun gets out of the way. The turn brings the king of clubs, which I'm loving. I now have a sneaky backdoor flush draw to go along with bottom pair. I check. My opponent suddenly goes from betting 1/3 pot to a full 100% pot, betting a single black Jimmy Dean. I pretend to tank, utilizing the same strategy I did with our young European friend from earlier. He has about 1,600 in his stack. This guy's the other guy's friend, but his aura is completely different. I think he's a tight player. I also put this guy on an exact hand, but it's not air. I'm putting him on the nut straight. I think he flopped it with 10 jack, which would explain why the flop bet was so tiny, but the turn bet was so huge. If I river trips or two pairs, it'll be no good. I need exactly a club, which gives me roughly 20%. He has more than enough money in his stack to justify a call. If the river is a club that doesn't pair the board or change anything dramatic, I'll be able to get his entire stack. I'm never folding here. But taking my time before I make the call deceptively changes perception on what I might be holding. You don't want to make the same mistake as opponents from my previous vlogs, calling immediately and letting me know exactly what they have. Someone of my caliber takes every small detail into account, including how long it takes for someone to call, so don't give another player that advantage either. I call after a good amount of time has elapsed. The river is a much welcomed club, but it's the jack of clubs, making it possible for a one-card straight. This is a much welcome sight, but it's not ideal. I have the clear winner. However, with this run out, my opponent can only hope to chop at best. If it were a random innocuous club, I would have put in a check raise for his entire stack. As it stands, an overbet here is the best strategy. I slide in $500, but one of my stacks is bad, for a bet of $495 into the pot of $300. My opponent doesn't take too long before calling, because I'm almost positive he has that 10 jack. We're back in the green for $1,162, barely 40 minutes into the session. 20 minutes later, the action guy gets up along with his buddy, so our table breaks. I have a stomachache since I took the kids to Cowabunga Bay earlier in the day, which is a water park in the Summerlin area. I'm feeling queasy from the water slides, so I decide to rack up and call it an early night. In for $1,500 and out for $2,638, for a profit of $1,138 after 1 hour and 4 minutes. This brings us to our next session of note. It's Friday night, technically Saturday morning. We start our session at 12:16 in the morning and buy in for $1,500 as usual, which is 300 big blinds. 20 minutes into the session, I'm in the small blind with ace-9 offsuit. The middle position, low jack, and high jack all limp. I complete the small blind, and the big blind checks. We go 5-handed to a flop of ace, deuce, 4 with 2 diamonds. I lead for a small bet of 15, not loving the kicker I'm forced to play in the blinds, but not hating it either. If I get raised, I can easily fold. The middle position calls, but everyone else folds. We go heads up to a 10 of spades on the turn. I lead for another non-committal bet of 25. My opponent calls again, which has me feeling pretty good. If he had ace-10, he would have raised me already. A bigger ace would have raised pre-flop. The river is a deuce of spades, which I'm not loving because I now chop with any random ace. There's nothing for me to do here but check. My opponent bets out for a tiny bet of 30. I'm expecting a chop, so I make the call. He shows king-7 of diamonds for a missed flush draw. That was a huge amateur move. I don't know what he was expecting with a rob attempt as flaccid as a wet noodle and as thin as Mr. Poopy Butthole.
Hi, I'm Mr. Poopy Butthole.
Some time passes by with a whole lot of nothing going on. I'm up $109, 55 minutes into the session.
One eternity later.
We're now 1 hour and 48 minutes into the session, and I'm down to only up $25. People ask me what they should do when they're card dead. It's pretty easy, really. Do the same thing I do. I've been folding by the river all the livelong day. I've been folding by the river just to pass the time away. Can't you feel my tilt factor rising, rising so early in the morn? Can't you hear my inner voice shouting, should I take my phone out to watch porn? I finally moved to a different table because my current table provides no action whatsoever. For this hand, the middle position opens to 20 with about a $1,300 stack. It's our tight friend that I robbed the other day in our last vlog with 8-9 of clubs. So obviously I need to 3-bet here to 80 with ace-king in the small blind. Everyone else folds and he calls. The flop comes 9, 10, 7, rainbow. This is a bad board, not because I completely missed it, but it smashes his range pretty hard. I check, fully expecting to fold to any bet, but he checks the action back. The turn brings a king of diamonds. That's a pretty good card. If I didn't actually have a king, like if I had ace-queen for instance, I would still bet on this card. I start cutting out a bet when my opponent instantly chucks his cards across the table in disgust. I think he might have had a pretty big hand there, like jacks or queens. A few minutes later, after almost 2 hours of getting a whole lot of dookie, there's a live 10. The low jack opens to 35 with a stack of about 1500. I 3-bet to 105 on the button with the second best starting hand in poker and my least favorite premium hand. Oh yes, we're talking about pocket kings. Everyone folds to the original raiser, who confidently cuts out a 4-bet to a terrifying $325. Oh gosh, I only just made this money in my last vlog after going over an entire month with a net profit of under $100 with them. Am I about to lose the entirety of my profits the very next time I pick them up with this stupid hand? My only hope is that my opponent thinks I'm 3-betting light on the button and is holding exactly pocket queens. Since he's not some 90-year-old guy with one foot in the grave, obviously I can't fold here, so I make the call. The flop comes Jack, 9, 8, rainbow. My opponent surprisingly checks. I wouldn't have expected that from aces. Well, pocket queens really doesn't beat much on this flop other than ace king and pocket tens, so I hope that's what he has. I bet 300 in position. If my opponent jams on me here, I'm going to feel disgusted. I'll probably lean more towards folding. Instead, he thinks about it for a moment before just calling. The turn brings the queen of hearts. Now the one hand I was ahead of, I no longer beat. Even pocket tens just made a straight. Now you might understand my curse with kings. Every single other premium hand has me beat right now. My opponent checks. With the one card straight out there, he could just as easily be doing this with top set. I check the action back. The river brings a 3 of clubs, changing absolutely nothing. My opponent checks again. I'm curious how I got beaten this time. Was it aces? Was it queens? I'm not about to turn an overpair into a bluff, especially one that will only work against aces. So of course, I check the action back again. Thankfully, I get the best possible news. It's a chop. He also has pocket kings. Phew! Would you guys have played this hand any differently? Let me know in the comments below. Shortly after this hand, I move yet again to another table. Table selection is extremely important in being a profitable player. I was sharing the last table with 2 other pros and several decent players. Poker players need more exercise. Try getting some by getting off your bum when you're on a bad table and simply moving a few feet over to a different one. On this next table, we're at almost 3 hours into the session when I finally get a playable hand. Everyone is straddling. The action is also much better on this table than my previous 2. On top of that, I don't recognize any other pros. Here, the low jack limps. I open to 50 on the button with pocket tens. The big blind suddenly 3-bets me to 200 with a 1K stack. The action folds back to me. I'm not getting the right odds to call if I think I'm behind. The 3-bet sizing is a bit too large for a huge pair though, especially with his shallow stack. Smells more like ace-king. This opponent just lost a pretty big pot trying to bluff a calling station who couldn't let go of bottom pair. He just gave up and checked back the river when I think one more bet would have done the trick. Against someone like that, I'm not going anywhere just yet. I don't necessarily want to flip for a 1K against ace-king though, especially when I have position, so I just make the call. The flop comes king high with 2 spades. Oh goody, because that's the kind of flop I want to see when I'm already putting my opponent on ace-king. He leads with a down bet of 150. For his shallow stack, I can't continue here. I accept the $200 loss and just fold. Up until this point, I've only played 4 notable hands this session, and one of them was ace rag in the big blind. I'm at over 3.5 hours into my session, and my phone has under 20% battery left. I don't have very long left before I just have to call it a night and accept a small loss. I've been flirting with being positive just below $100 the entire night until the last hand. What should you do when you're simply card dead all night? It's easy. Just pretend you're Gambit and practice pitching cards into the muck. Just fold, and fold, and fold, over and over again. Pocket deuces though? Never folding this monster. We're currently 7-handed. Under the gun limps. The hijack opens to 30 with over a $1,300 stack. He's the loosest player on the table. The cutoff calls, and I call on the button. The under the gun limper calls as well. We go 4-handed in position to a flop of king, 5, deuce, all clubs. I'm ecstatic to flop my first set of the night, but I'm not all that excited the flop is all clubs. The under the gun checks. The original raiser leads for 60. The cutoff folds. For this type of board in a multi-way situation, it's better to just call this flop as opposed to raising. Sure, you might lose value if the club peels on the turn or river if your opponent doesn't have one, but on the other hand, if someone flopped a flush, you want to keep the pot manageable. You don't want to get forced to call off your entire stack with only a 30% chance of improving. So I make the call. The under the gun folds, so we go heads up. The turn is what I feel is the best card in the deck. It's another king. I like this card better than a board pairing 6 or a 2. The reason is, if a 6 or a 2 peels on the turn and your opponent only has a king, there's a decent chance he could fold to a turn raise, which you should always make with bottom boat. He's never folding top trips though, and you also have a flopped flush drawing dead. So when my opponent ramps up the heat to a bet of 160, I don't delay in putting the raise to 500. Ace King and King Queen will never fold here because they have outs to the nuts, and a flop flush will just stick in his stack with you at this point. Never slow play bottom boat. My opponent makes the call, so we go to a river card. I'm thinking to myself, if the board pairs again, there's one card that's better than the other. So when the deuce of hearts makes its appearance, I think to myself, is this love that I'm feeling? Is this the love that I've been searching for? Is this love, or am I dreaming? This must be love, cause it's really got a hold on me. Quadzilla makes his return visit and he's out for vengeance. He didn't like how y'all made fun of him last time for only winning $35. So when my opponent goes all in for his remaining $750 or so, Quadzilla tears him a new one. 3.5 hours of patiently folding. 3.5 hours of basically a flatline poker session. This would have been one of the most boring poker sessions I've had and would never have made it to the light of day had this hand not happened. I was getting ready to leave in the next 15 minutes or so anyways, so after a few hands, I rack up and call it a night. In for $1,700 and out for $2,813 for a profit of $1,113 after 3 hours and 36 minutes of playtime. You don't win 21 sessions in a row by simply running hot. You also don't make over $50,000 in 4 months of playing 2-5 part-time by simply getting lucky. So far on my poker vlog, I've showcased that I can flop top pair and top kicker and fold to a single raise. My opponent flopped the nut straight that hand, so I lost the absolute minimum. I've showcased that my math is solid in instances where I'm on a draw. I'm volatile enough to overshove a pot with 6 high as a semi-bluff. I rob whenever I smell weakness, and I outplay tight players with aggressiveness. When I'm card dead, I just fold over and over repeatedly, waiting for an opportune hand. And finally, I'm also fully capable of making live reads, even for my entire stack, coming to the right conclusion as long as I trust my judgment.
Are you not entertained? Are you not entertained? Is this not why you are here?
If you like what you've seen so far, please drop a like on this video and subscribe to my channel if you'd like to see more of my ability showcased. Don't forget to hit that notification bell to be alerted when new videos come out. And as always, I hope to see you in the next video.